Special guest with him today. Senator Rand Paul was alongside, and as you know, Paul has not been a cheerleader, we could say, of Trump. Afterward, he tweeted this: "I had a great time today with President Trump and believe we are getting closer to an agreement on health care." So how ironic if Rand Paul saves President Trump from what some have said is the biggest policy disaster he has had to date.
No, look, I think this is one of the smart things that the Trump administration has done, where the Obama administration fell flat. And this isn't policy. This is just the politics of trying to get things done on Capitol Hill. President Obama obviously played a lot of golf, but he tended to play it either with his own White House aides or celebrities from Hollywood or athletes. And certainly I'd rather play golf with Larry David than Mick Mulvaney, although Mick Mulvaney is a scratch golfer and really good.
Trump has also been seen out there with some,
absolutely.
some
no, absolutely.
of those
but
celebrities
my point is,
as well.
No, my point is, by being out there and playing with members, you're able to establish relationships. And that's one of the things even Democrats on Capitol Hill will tell you the Obama White House just didn't do. John Boehner was only invited one time, and John Boehner is a prodigious golfer, only invited one time with President Obama. I think it's very smart of Trump to do this. I'd encourage him to do it with a lot of Democrats, too.
As we pointed out, Jason, Paul was one of the big critics of this health care bill that the Republicans had put out there. Remember, he called it Obamacare Light, which was a phrase echoed from the Freedom Caucus as well. So if Trump and Paul can come to some kind of agreement on health care, what does that tell you?
It'll mean that they come to an agreement on something that even less than 17% of the American people think is a good idea. That was the approval rating, if I recall correctly, of the Obamacare replacement bill that they came up with. So if they're going to come up with something that Rand Paul and Donald Trump agree on, that means it's going to be closer to the right wing than it was to wherever it was before, which means that an even bigger amount of people will think it's a really bad idea, and it'll be even less likely to pass, which is a good thing for the country because it would cause, I believe the last bill would have caused 14 million people to lose health care right away.
I'll let you respond, Doug.
Well, look, obviously they're trying to sort this out. The hardest part of anything, as we've seen for the past few years in Congress, is getting to 218 votes in the House of Representatives. I can tell you, I worked a lot of votes on the House where we either had to pull the vote or we lost the vote on the floor. It's an embarrassing situation, and you're certainly projecting to the Democrats and to the country at large if you're not in a position of strength. So the smart thing for Trump to do is try and get some kind of package that can pass the House that the Senate will at least look at. Whatever the popularity numbers are after the fact, that you can deal with after the fact. You've got to pass a bill first if you're going to do anything.
And Lynn, the president did address health care in this Financial Times interview that he had this afternoon, and he actually referred to the Freedom Caucus as his friends, which caught my eye. I thought that was an interesting comment after all these attacks that we've seen on Twitter going after the Freedom Caucus. Is that how he treats his friends?
Well, yes. And we have a few things out there. Clearly, President Trump just wants to make a deal. That's what this is evolving into. If 30 Democrats came over to him tonight and said, we'll throw in with the Republicans and maybe we need this or that, maybe they would get something. Now, this isn't going to happen. You know, these health care policies are also rooted in deeply held beliefs by members of the Republican Party. So, you know, you might think you have a deal with Rand Paul, but what did you actually make a deal to that will help not lose other Republicans as you get to the march of two? I think right now the number is 216 that they need to pass, and that so what is the core belief that President Trump has that he is trying to get done here? It just seems, to say the least, incongruous that, you know, in one tweet or one statement you say, I want to work with the Democrats, then these Freedom Caucus guys are no good, I'm going to run against them. You know, naming Representative Amish, now I had a golf game with Rand Paul, it's all going to be okay. You need the legislation, we need details, we need facts to know what really is going on, and then we could count the votes.
All right, Lynn Sweet, Doug High, and Jason Kander, thank you all.
Thank you.
Coming up, my next guest knows Michael Flynn so well he actually wrote a book with him. What he thinks of Flynn's request for immunity and his newly revealed Russian speaking feeds. Then later, the famously private First Lady Melania Trump ventures back into the spotlight. Her big week in Washington.
Aaron Burton.
You're live in the CNN Newsroom. Hello on a Sunday. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. We began with three mighty challenges for the president this week: China, the Russia probe, and the Supreme Court. Just one of those would make for a big week. The president will grapple with all three in the coming days. First up, Trump's dramatic new interview about a nuclear threat just days before he meets with the leader of China at Mar-a-Lago. The president telling the Financial Times today, well, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. Could make for a frosty meeting in sunny Florida later this week. And then there's the Russia probe that continues. New revelations now that Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, failed to initially disclose thousands of dollars in Russian speaking fees. The president insisting this is all just a distraction, tweeting, the real story turns out to be surveillance and leaking. Find the leakers. And let's not forget the Supreme Court. President Trump getting closer to perhaps a win with Judge Neil Gorsuch. A third Democrat now says he will vote yes on the president's nominee. A committee vote comes tomorrow with the full confirmation vote now just 5 days away. We have our team of reporters and analysts ready to cover every angle. I want to begin with CNN's Ryan Nobles outside the White House where the cloud of Russia and the probe there continues to hang over this Trump presidency. Ryan, we just heard this morning from the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee today.
Yeah, that's right. And Adam Schiff seems to be skeptical about the role that Michael Flynn could potentially play in this investigation into Russia's attempted meddling in the American election. Of course, Flynn this week saying that he would testify to both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees in exchange for immunity. And he had the support of the president himself, who tweeted that Michael Flynn should indeed seek immunity. But Schiff said this morning that he thinks that that was a message that the president was sending and that it ultimately wouldn't actually help the investigation all that much. Take a listen to what Schiff had to say.
The president's pretty transparent in his tweets. I think he wanted to get across a message that he's not afraid of what General Flynn has to say and basically daring the Congress to give him immunity. And then if we make a judgment that, no, we shouldn't be giving him immunity, the president can say we don't want his story to come out. So I think it was a strategic move by the president and a pretty transparent one.
That was Schiff this morning on CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper. And what's interesting about that is that there's been this thought that Flynn could potentially be a central figure in this investigation into Russia's role in the American election. But Democrats on both the House and Senate side seem to be very skeptical that he could really provide anything tangible. That's why at this point, both committees have said that they're not going to take him up on his offer of immunity. Anna?
Thank you, Ryan Nobles. Let's bring in Matt Rivers in Beijing. And Matt, China's president, we know, is coming to the U.S. will meet for the first time with President Trump. Today, President Trump, in short, said the U.S. will take on North Korea with or without China. So how is China reacting?
Well, when Chinese officials wake up here in Beijing a little bit later on this morning, they're likely going to react in the exact same way that they have been very consistent when it comes to North Korea. What the Chinese argue is that the only way to solve the crisis on the Korean Peninsula is through negotiations, is through returning to the negotiating table, be it through the model of the six-party talks that ultimately failed back in the mid-2000s, or through direct negotiations between the United States and the DPRK, the regime in Pyongyang. China has long argued that that is the only way that this problem will eventually be solved. Now, the Trump administration has said that it thinks that China should be doing more to solve this problem, that it should be using its economic leverage over Pyongyang, and that is the message that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson brought when he came here to China a few weeks ago. But I think Chinese diplomats perhaps not going to be surprised by this interview given by Donald Trump in the Financial Times. The Trump administration has signaled that it wants to take a harder line stance on North Korea, and that it believes that China should be involved in that. So I don't think that they're going to be very surprised here, although this is not the preferred route the Chinese want to take in terms of figuring out a solution to this ongoing problem. Anna.
How seriously does China take the president's words, typically, in terms of what we've seen so far?
Well, I think the Chinese are looking at this at face value the exact same way that we all are. They're looking at what he says and they're taking it at face value. But it's worth noting that a lot of the things that Donald Trump has said, specifically as a candidate, he did not follow through or hasn't followed through on so far during his presidency. Don't forget, during the campaign, he was going to label China a currency manipulator on day one of his administration. That didn't happen. He threatened imposing tariffs on Chinese imports. He has not done that yet. He's held to long-standing diplomatic norms under the One China policy. So really the Trump administration has differed from candidate Trump in a lot of ways. So the Chinese have taken that as an optimistic sign that perhaps they can work with the Trump administration. So they're going to take this at face value, but they're going into this meeting hoping for the best.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court nomination fight that lies ahead of the Senate this week. Our reporter Ariane DeVogue has been following this closely. Ariane, where are things now when you look at CNN's whip count for Judge Neil Gorsuch?
Well, Anna, tomorrow is a big day, right? The Senate Judiciary Committee will meet to vote. Gorsuch is expected to advance, but we're also going to get more of a sense of where key Democrats are before the big votes later in the week. And Anna, it's all about the math right now. As things stand, it'll take 60 votes to confirm him. As of Friday, 36 Democrats, led by Senator Chuck Schumer, suggested they'd filibuster. Now, 3 Democrats said that they would support him. Those Democrats, they come from states where Trump won. They said, look, we're furious that Merrick Garland never got a vote, but elections matter and Gorsuch is qualified. Now the Republicans say, look, if the Democrats choose to filibuster, then the Republicans will go ahead and change the rules of the Senate. They'll make it easier for Supreme Court nominees to get through. And McConnell said it this over the weekend, and he has set a vote for this, Anna, for Friday.
And where does that end? You know, when you're changing the rules, that's the big question that a lot of people have been asking, and why it matters so much what happens on this particular issue with the Supreme Court nominee. Ryan Nobles, Matt Rivers, and Ariane DeVogue, our thanks to all of you. And let's talk more about all of these developments with our CNN political commentators. Joining us, Republican strategist and former Ted Cruz communications director Alice Stewart, and also with us, former manager of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, Patty Solis Doyle. Patty, what's your reaction to the tough talk we heard, or we read about with the president gearing up for this big meeting with China's leader?
Well, look, it definitely is tough talk, and President Trump has a reputation for tough talk, but not really following through. You know, when he took the call from Taiwan during the transition, he very much led China to believe that the One China policy was up for negotiation. Yet when his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, sort of brokered the call between Trump and the president of China, he sort of backed down very easily, in fact, and then later gave out a statement that was almost, you know, groveling of China. I think what we have next week with the visit from the Chinese president is essentially we have the leader of the most powerful country in the world meeting with the leader of the second most powerful country in the world. And Trump is coming into that meeting very much in a weakened state. You know, his 2 big initiatives have failed, the travel ban and health care. His administration is under FBI investigation, and his favorability rating right now is at 37. So I think he may be overcompensating with tough talk to sort of cover up the weaknesses that he has right now.
Alice, is there risk in overplaying your hand with this tough talk?
More than anything, the way I take that statement combined with what Nikki Haley said earlier today, it goes to show that the priority here leading up to these meetings with Chinese officials is that taking a stand on North Korea is critical. Putting an end to the weapons program is paramount, not just to the United States, but certainly to China as well. And what UN Ambassador Haley said today was that, look, we need to influence and we need to push China to encourage North Korea to put a halt to their weapons program. No one has a more vested interest in that than China, and we need to encourage them to do so. Following up with that, we have the president basically saying, look, if China is not going to help us in this process, I am not afraid to go it alone. I'm not afraid to take actions into my own hands. We don't need that. We don't want that. We'd ideally do it together. But if China is not going to help, I think the president intends fully to follow through on his plan to do it alone.
And that's on top of what we heard a couple of weeks ago when Rex Tillerson was in that region, and he said that basically all options are on the table, including some kind of forceful option. So we are hearing an escalation in terms of the verbiage used by this administration in dealing with North Korea. Let's talk a little bit about Russia and the Russian investigation right now. Patty, here's what Congresswoman Maxine Waters told CNN earlier today.
I know if we can prove collusion that he is impeachable. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but I do. I'm going to deal with this president and his incompetency and his inability to lead the nation, and that's going to be my story until I get him impeached.
Patty, are Democrats getting ahead of themselves there? We do not have proof of collusion right now.
The key words there are right now. There's an ongoing investigation with the FBI. They have not completed it. But I think what is clear is that we need an independent investigation rather than what the Intel Committee is doing both on the House and Senate side. I think Representative Nunes's actions of last week that he went to the White House in the middle of the night to get intel from the White House that was given to him by a member of General Flynn's staff who had to resign because he lied to the vice president. And then Representative Nunes comes out and has a press conference that kind of, sort of, but not really, backs the president's bogus claims that he was wiretapped.
It doesn't back the bogus claim that he was wiretapped.
Well, I'm sorry, that he was
FBI
surveilled.
Came out and said that there was no wiretapping, and Nunes even said that those documents did not say anything to that effect. It did not say President Obama wiretapped the president.
No,
let's just make sure that is clear.
It is clear, but the purpose of the press conference was to try and sort of back up the fact that it wasn't a wiretap. We all know it wasn't a wiretap, but surveilled, and surveillance covers so many different things, including incidental surveillance. I mean, it's all just very bogus. But what's clear, and many Republicans agree with me and agree with Democrats, that we need an independent investigation. There is no way that after Nunes's actions that he has proven that he can run a bipartisan investigation.
Anna, let me just follow up on Congressman Waters' statements about collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Look, as Adam Schiff said this morning, there is no concrete evidence to date that shows that. That is part of the investigation. That's what we're looking at. I think everyone in all facets of this issue are getting ahead of themselves, and there's too much jumping to conclusions. I think we need to let the facts lead to the conclusion and let the facts play out as they may. Look, surely there's a lot here that doesn't pass the smell test. To Patty's point, the way Nunes handled receiving the information and disseminating it and not talking about it with members of his Intel Committee first, that is cause for concern. And I do agree with Senators McCain and Lindsey Graham that it is time to bring in someone from the outside to investigate this, and so we can have a fair and impartial viewing of the information and investigation here. But the bottom line is the most important issue here is Russians' interference and influence in our election. That's what we need to be focusing on. That's the most important and critical issue for all Americans.
Now, President Trump, along with sending out this tweet today saying we shouldn't be focusing on that, but rather we should be focusing on the leaks, he's also playing golf today. He was out on a golf course 14th time since taking office, and he had a special guest with him. It was Senator Rand Paul, and as you both know, Paul has not been a huge fan of Trump. Afterward, Paul had this to say.
We had a great day with the president today. We did talk about some health care reform. I think the sides are getting closer and closer together, and I remain very optimistic that we will get Obamacare repeal.
Alice, could Paul end up being the hero on health care here?
I don't care who the hero is. I just want someone to bring the ball down the field when it comes to health care. And look, this is a great step. It was clear right after the initial failure of AHCA that there was some frustration in the White House, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that they're working for a plan B and wanting to get it right. They clearly need to work with folks like Rand Paul, but also with the moderates in the House as well as the more conservatives in the House Freedom Caucus. And I think this is a great step today to moving forward, moving the ball down the field, and I'm anxious to see what they plan to do with reaching out to all sides of not just the Republican Party but the Democrats to make this thing happen, because Americans voted for Republicans into office for lower premiums and greater access to health care, and Republicans that I know plan to deliver on that.
Ladies, we got to leave it there. Alice Stewart and Patty Solis-Doyle, thank you. Coming up, President Trump makes his 14th visit again to a golf course, a Trump golf course. Does he no longer stand by this?
And honestly, Obama ought to get off the golf course and get down there.
And later, Fox News anchor Bill will report that he was paid large speaking fees from some Russian companies. Flynn left that information off an ethics disclosure form back when he was on the White House staff. Since leaving the job, on new documents just filed this past Friday, 3 new entries, thousands of dollars to Flynn from 3 Russian companies. This is a major development because you'll recall a few days ago, General Flynn announced he's going to testify in the federal investigation of Russia's election meddling if he is given immunity. Joining me now, freedom scholar for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, Michael Ledeen. He also co-authored a book with General Flynn, The Field of Fight. And Michael, we appreciate you coming on. In the run-up to his confirmation, you were here on CNN talking about General Flynn. You called him a good pick for National Security Advisor. I'm curious if your opinion of Flynn has changed in light of his resignation and everything that has happened since then.
Nope, I think he was a very good pick for National Security Advisor, and I wish he'd stayed.
How do you square what has happened with that opinion?
Well, I don't see that anything's happened. He did not announce that he'd asked for immunity. His lawyer is talking to the various committees that are interested in talking to him. And hardly anybody knows what this process is like. I, unfortunately, know about it all too well because I had to testify during the Iran-Contra hearings. And it turns out that your biggest risk in this process is not anything that you did. And as far as I can tell, Flynn hasn't done anything wrong, but what you say.
Well, we don't know if he's done anything illegal criminally at this point, but we do know he was fired because he lied to the vice president about his conversations with the Russian ambassador to the U.S., which was captured as part of incidental surveillance, we have since learned, in which he discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador at a time where there's an investigation into Russia's meddling in the U.S. election. So that's one thing that has obviously created a bit of a cloud that led to his resignation or being fired by the Trump administration. We also now have learned that he did not disclose this financial information as part of his ethics disclosure form. That doesn't bother you at all?
Well, I don't know the facts.
I just told you what the facts are as we know them.
No, you told me the facts as you think you know them, as we think we know them. You haven't seen those documents. I haven't seen those documents. So we don't know. We have only accounts of what is in there. So
we do have those documents. We showed them on our air yesterday, the disclosure forms from his financial disclosures.
I'm talking about the intercepts. I'm talking about the documents in connection with his conversations with the Russian ambassador. I certainly haven't seen that, and I have nothing to say about his finances. I don't know the first thing about them.
Okay. Does it raise any red flags, though, that he didn't survive as NSA director or the National Security Advisor, I should say, past February?
I think it raises real doubts about the judgment of the people in the White House.
And how do you see that?
I think they made a mistake. I think, as I understand what happened between him and the vice president, and again, I don't know exactly what transpired. I wasn't there. But as I understand it, General Flynn, was called when he was on a 2-day break from round-the-clock work and asked about that conversation with the Russian ambassador. He had had multiple conversations, and he may well have said things that were incomplete or inaccurate and confused the conversation and so forth. We just don't know. But I have yet to see him accused of any criminal activity, and if he filed late, there are an awful lot of questions about what you're supposed to file and what you have to file, and it would take a wizard to decipher them all. And if he was sloppy, he was sloppy, but he's fine.
With or without the help of China. Earlier today, the president told the Financial Times, quote, well, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. And this is tough talk coming just days before Trump hosts Chinese President Xi Jinping for his Florida resort, and it'll be their first face-to-face meeting. Let's bring in CNN Global Affairs correspondent Elise Labott, who's on assignment in Jerusalem. Elise, thanks for making time for us. How does this interview with the Financial Times set the table, so to speak, for these important talks? Is this as big of a deal as it seems?
Well, Anna, you know that President Trump is a real tough talker, and I think this is kind of his opening gambit. This is kind of similar, if you will, to what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson did on the road on the eve of his meeting with President Xi in Beijing from South Korea. He was talking about that North Korea policy of the last 20 years, what we've called strategic patience, wasn't working. And so I think President Trump is sending a signal to the Chinese that the U.S. wants China to use its considerable leverage on North Korea, and if it doesn't, the U.S., as he said, will go it alone. Now, what could that mean? It could obviously mean a preemptive strike. It could mean some kind of covert action, such as a cyber action, but it could also mean more sanctions. And what we're talking about is really what they call secondary sanctions, which are sanctions on Chinese companies, and the Chinese know this very well, Chinese companies that are doing business with North Korea. And certainly that was a message that Secretary Tillerson warned the Chinese about when he was there. And so I think President Trump in this interview is saying there's a lot of pressure we could put on China to make sure that they're playing ball, Anna.
Now, I know you have been traveling with the Secretary of State in the past week. There's still a lot of mystery surrounding Rex Tillerson, Elise. What are you learning about how he operates?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly different. I've covered, this is really my 6th Secretary of State now, and he's really much different than any of the others. This is obviously someone who was a CEO. He was at one big company, ExxonMobil, for 40 years. And so he really brings that kind of CEO mentality. And as a CEO, he traveled very light with only a few aides. He was very, you know, involved in the structure of the company and in trying to kind of game out what he calls whiteboarding. He has these whiteboards where he's working on the structure of the company. And I think what's really different is that kind of hands-on diplomatic, you know, kind of touchy-feely, if you will, that people were familiar with from Secretary Kerry or Secretary Clinton. He was an engineer by trade, so it's a much more methodical kind of looking at the facts before him and making studied decisions, where I think everybody is looking for him to dive in right away. He wants to bone up on the issues. He wants to form those relationships before you see anything very dramatic. And certainly he's not very comfortable, it's obvious, with the public diplomacy aspects of this job. You know, the U.S. Secretary of State is one of the most important people of the world, and that a lot is through the kind of bully pulpit, if you will, using the press, using those public appearances. Secretary Tillerson certainly intends to have a much smaller profile, a much lower profile, and that's what we've seen from him on the road. He is having some press interactions, but it's very few and far between.
We also hear he's a prolific reader. We also know that the president has proposed a budget that would cut almost 30% of the money from that department, from the Secretary of State's budget. And there are still a lot of positions under him that have been left unfilled. What's going on there?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern that Secretary Tillerson is not really fighting back for those cuts. I mean, he has said that he wants to see it as kind of a glide path to a restructuring of the department, to a restructuring of the budget. But I think what you've seen is, what I think a lot of officials are afraid at the State Department is going to be a gutting of the State Department, a gutting of U.S. diplomacy, if you will. As you've seen this military buildup, there are a lot of positions that have yet to be filled. Secretary Tillerson is the only confirmed official at the State Department, and you've heard from diplomats that we've talked to, they really don't have anybody to engage with at the State Department. So it's really Secretary Tillerson, and he just has a bunch of small aides that don't have any foreign policy experience. So it is a bit concerning, but the hope is that as more officials get confirmed, there'll be more diplomatic interactions.
Elise Labott reporting in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you. Coming up, what's been dubbed the Beltway's equivalent of a rare bird sighting? Melania Trump's week back in the spotlight. What's next for the famously private First Lady? To the paparazzi, she is the great white whale, a figure so famous and yet so elusive, a photo of her is hard to come by. But that changed this week when First Lady Melania Trump left her penthouse in New York to step back into the spotlight. Here's Randy Kay.
Ladies and gentlemen,
it was First Lady Melania Trump's first visit to the State Department, her first visit to any cabinet department. More than 2 months into her husband's term, Mrs. Trump is still keeping a low profile. Until Wednesday, the last time she spoke before a television camera was February 18th at a thank you rally in Florida with her husband.
Thank you.
Here at the State Department, she took part in the International Women of Courage Awards.
These honorees who have fought on the front lines against injustice are true heroes.
The First Lady is still living in New York City at Trump Tower with the couple's young son Barron, at least until he finishes the school year. Her arrival in Washington this week considered such a rare event that the Washington Post likened it to a rare bird sighting.
I urge you to not be afraid to fail, as failure will never have the power to define you, as long as you learn from it.
It seems the First Lady is taking steps to define her platform, highlighting education and women's empowerment at this event. Impeccably dressed, she presented awards to women and girls from around the world, honored for their courage, strength, and leadership.
I ask you to allow the triumphs exemplified by these heroic women to inspire you in your own lives, and to remind yourself that you, too, are capable of greatness.
It has been an unusually active week in Washington for the First Lady. On Monday, she announced her new communications director. And on Tuesday night, she and the President hosted a bipartisan reception for senators and their spouses at the White House.
Enjoy these incredible musicians. They are really something special. And Melania, thank you very much.
Melania Trump hadn't been in Washington since earlier this month, when she hosted a luncheon to celebrate International Women's Day. But there isn't any video of her speech since the press was escorted from the room as she took the podium.
Hello, how are you?
Before that, Melania Trump appeared in New York City on March 2nd, reading to children at New York's Presbyterian Hospital from a book she told the kids was one of her favorites, Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go.
You can steer yourself any directions you choose.
That was Randy Kay reporting. That's one of my favorites, too. Thank you, Randy. I want to talk more about this with our expert on all things First Ladies, CNN contributor and author of First Women, Kate Anderson Brower. Kate, you've compared Melania Trump to Mona Lisa. How so?
Well, I think she's really inscrutable. It's impossible to figure out what she's thinking. I mean, she's beautiful. She's unattainably beautiful, I think, to a lot of women, which I think makes it more challenging for her. She's not somebody who you can imagine relating to. I've thought about, you know, being in the carpool line with, whereas Michelle Obama and Laura Bush were first ladies who were potentially easier to talk to. But we have had first ladies who have been very reclusive. I mean, Bess Truman spent most of her time in Independence, Missouri, and was rarely in Washington. So it's not an entirely new thing to have a first lady who avoids Washington.
Here's how Washington Post writer Paul Schwartzman described the First Lady. He writes, quote, 2 months after her husband's swearing in, the nation's new First Lady approaches her role with a discernible reticence. Her paucity of public appearances, each defined by tight smiles and spare verbiage, overshadowed by a vanishing act that stretches days on end. So up until her appearance this past week, has that been your perception or interpretation as well?
Yeah, I mean, you know, on the campaign trail, we rarely saw her too. And then when she gave that address at the Republican National Convention, she, you know, cribbed from Michelle Obama's 2008 DNC address and got into some hot water for that. So I think that she's had some trouble in the spotlight. She's clearly someone who's not comfortable giving speeches. She often seems to be giving a, you know, a kind of frozen smile, and you actually don't see her actually smiling all that much. So I think that people want to like her, though. I think people want to give her a chance. We're still early in this administration. As you mentioned, she just hired a communications director this week. She's got 4 staffers that we know of right now. And so I think we might see some changes when she moves to D.C. this summer, which I'm told she will absolutely be doing.
Have you heard how she feels about how the president's first 70 days have gone?
I haven't. I would love to know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I have heard that she feels very vulnerable in terms of coming up with a program like Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign to end childhood obesity. But it did take Michelle Obama about a year to come up with that program. So I think people are willing to give her a little bit of time. It's hard to come on the heels of somebody who left with an approval rating that was, approaching 60, 70%. So I think she's in a difficult position.
Well, the president has pointed out that Melania's approval rating is actually higher than his own. So she's not doing too bad. I imagine it would be a little intimidating to be in her position. Now, Melania was not the only first lady who made some headlines this week. We saw Hillary Clinton also step back into the spotlight. Let's listen to what she had to say.
We need to resist actions that go against our values as Americans, whether that's attacking immigrants and refugees, denying climate change, or passing bogus laws that make it harder for people to vote in elections.
Clearly, she hasn't given up politics. A jab there at President Trump. What do you see as her role now?
Well, I've spoken to some high-profile Democrats who talk about Hillary Clinton being able to come out as time passes and be a more critical voice and to give voice to people who did not vote for Donald Trump. For President Obama, it's a little bit more difficult because just decorum and the rules of what we see with former presidents is they don't typically come out. Even with President Bush, you saw Vice President Cheney doing a lot of the criticizing of President Obama. So I think we'll be seeing more of Hillary Clinton now that we're past that 50-day mark.
All right, Kate Ederson-Brower, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
She's the Oscar-winning actress who could once barely afford groceries. Coming up one-on-one with Patricia Arquette. Her fight to get equal pay for women and her message to all those critics out there.
The headline was, "Female Millionaire Claims American Women Don't Have Equal Rights." Well, what did you think when you read that?
14. That's how many times the president has gone golfing at a Trump property since taking office. His affinity for the sport inspiring the latest cover of The Economist, depicting the president stuck in a sand trap under the headline, "The Trump Presidency So Far." And it's not just golf courses. Every few days since taking office, the president has stopped by a Trump building, a Trump hotel, or Trump resort, according to a breakdown by the Washington Post. And all that activity behind closed doors with no real oversight has raised the hackles of government watchdogs. Democrats are now pushing for legislation demanding visitor logs at places like his Mar-a-Lago resort. I want to bring in former Obama White House ethics czar and former U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic, Norman Eisen, and former Reagan political director Jeffrey Lord. Ambassador Eisen, before his election, Trump repeatedly slammed President Obama for his time on the golf course, and so someone counted that President Trump has now played a round of golf for every 5.5 days in office. We know a president playing golf is nothing new, so I don't want to focus on that necessarily, but is spending all this time at Trump properties an ethics concern?
Anna, thanks for having me. I have no objection to President Trump playing golf. I do object to the hypocrisy of him hitting President Obama on it and then outdoing President Obama many times over at this point in the administration. You point to the correct issue, though. According to the calculations, President Trump has spent almost a third of his time at his own properties, promoting those properties and exploiting the office for his personal gain. We've never seen anything like it, and it's part and parcel of a much larger pattern of unethical, illegal, and in the president's case, unconstitutional behavior. So
hold your thought there.
That's why it matters,
Norman, because I want to make sure that we give Jeffrey a chance to respond to just that first part, because Jeffrey, it doesn't really seem like the president is trying to put distance between himself and the Trump organization by spending all this time at these properties, does it?
Well, presidents tend to do what they tend to do in terms of their own personal lives. President Reagan was criticized repeatedly for going to his ranch in California and taking the whole month of August off. On and on and on you can go. President Trump is unusual because he's a billionaire. He was a private citizen who went straight from private life to the presidency. He owns all these properties. There's absolutely nothing wrong about this. I do think that this is the beginning of a good conversation about the differences between private life and public life and how politicians use their public life and public service as, say, a congressman to get elected to the Senate or the governorship, etc., and nobody blinks.
But the bottom line is he's spending all this time at a business that his family stands to benefit from.
Well, but
Jeffrey.
it was his business. Are we saying he should stop going to his own place? I mean, that's crazy.
Yes, Jeffrey. Yes, he should, because number one, he's violating the Constitution. The Constitution provides the president cannot receive foreign or domestic cash or benefits from foreign governments or domestic governments. He's raking in the cash. This is an infomercial for him to get unconstitutional foreign government cash and benefits starting at his hotel. Number two, Jeffrey, it's part of a larger pattern. That's why ethics matter. There's a pattern of illegality and unconstitutionality in the administration. It's very worrying. The latest is the Jared and Ivanka mess, where they've got a bunch of conflicts and a bunch of recusals, and the Russiagate investigation with Trump's own Russia cash unanswered for. His son says he collects a lot of it. So there's a lot of problems here, Jeffrey.
Let's take a look at the Ivanka Trump issue, because now we know that she's becoming an unpaid senior advisor in the White House. And Ambassador, you tweeted this specifically, quote, Jared's wife has trademarks from and business with China. Shouldn't he be recused? Well, at least she doesn't work in the White House. Oops. So you see murky waters here. Explain specifically where those pitfalls are.
Let me explain the pitfalls and then turn it over to you, Jeffrey. Number one, the problem is that we have something it's not only that Trump is promoting his own properties, violating Constitution, the people violating around the law. He's brought in his family members into the White House. What happened to anti-nepotism protection? And those family members are his closest advisors. It's like something out of Tin Pot Country princelings standing behind the throne. And here's why it matters. Jared and Ivanka have just as many conflicts with all of their business dealings around the country and around the world, including in China, as their father or father-in-law respectively does. So as a legal matter, they shouldn't be working on those things. Do we have confidence that the White House is going to keep them from doing it? I don't.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
First of all, at least by my count, 10 presidents of the United States, beginning with John Adams, have brought in family members to help run their White House. People with names like Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Van Buren, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy's brother was in the cabinet. At the same time, I might add, that the Kennedy family had extensive business interests all over the world. There wasn't a peep from these folks at that point, not a peep. Hillary Clinton is famous, of course, because she was Bill Clinton's wife and was put in charge of health care. There wasn't a peep of dissent from Democrats. They all thought it was great. In other words, this is just a lot of politics. It's a lot of double standards, and that's really all it is.
Jeffrey, that's
Norm, is this a double standard?
No. Jeffrey, Martin Van Buren, the anti-nepotism law was put on the books in the 1960s. So, of course, the stuff that happened...
revenge on Bobby Kennedy. I mean, that's a real
wait a minute. It's known as the Bobby Kennedy law. And when I worked in the White House and my Republican predecessors, we were bound by that law, and we had to send family members away. I don't think it's proper to have Jared and Ivanka there. Whatever the law says, there's arguments about the law. It makes no sense from a policy perspective. When we're in a crisis, please let me finish, Jeffrey. When we're in a crisis, we want to know that the official advisors will have their first loyalty to the United States, not to the man who happens to sit in the Oval Office, who's their father or father-in-law. It's very dangerous for the country. It doesn't look right. And all of them are keeping their businesses, and all of them are exploiting the office. I can't believe what's happening.
Norman, when you get to be
gentlemen, we need to leave it there, gentlemen. Finish your sentence, Jeffrey, and then we'll run.
Critical of politicians for doing the same thing with using public life for their to feather their political nest, then perhaps we can have a conversation.
All right, Jeffrey Lord, Norman Eisen, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks,
Still
Anna.
ahead
Thanks,
here
Jeff.
tonight, are the leaders of the world's two biggest polluters switching sides? A look at how President